Welcome to my channel. The story of the ancient world is often written in stone and gold, but before the first pyramid was ever conceived, and before the first pharaoh wore the crown of two lands, there was only the water. To understand the soul of Egypt, one must first understand the rhythm of the Nile. It is a river that does not merely flow through a landscape, it creates the landscape itself. For thousands of miles, this lifeline travels through the harshest deserts on the planet, a narrow ribbon of deep blue and vibrant green cutting through a world of endless orange sand. In the silence of the pre-dawn light, the river appears as a mirror, reflecting a sky that has watched over these banks for millions of years. This water is the reason a civilization could rise where life should have been impossible. The ancient Egyptians did not see the Nile as just a source of water. They saw it as a god, a gift, and the very pulse of the universe. They called their land Kemet, the Black Land, because of the rich, dark silt the river deposited every year. Everything outside that narrow green strip was Deshret, the Red Land, the realm of chaos and death. The miracle of the Nile was its predictability. Every year, with almost mathematical precision, the river would rise. This was the season of Akhe, the inundation. While other civilizations lived in fear of unpredictable floods that brought destruction, the Egyptians waited for the water with a sense of sacred anticipation. They knew that the flood was not a disaster, but a rebirth. As the waters overflowed the banks, they brought with them the minerals and nutrients of the Ethiopian highlands, spreading a layer of fertile silt across the valley floor. This was the original alchemy, the transformation of water into bread, and of mud into a kingdom. The people of the valley organized their entire existence around this pulse. Their calendar was not based on the movements of the sun alone, but on the behavior of the water. There were 3 seasons: the flooding, the emergence of the land, and the harvest. Because the river provided so much, it allowed the mind to wander beyond the mere struggle for survival. It gave the people the luxury of time. In that time, they looked at the stars, they developed mathematics, and they began to wonder about the nature of eternity. If you were to stand on the banks of the Nile 5,000 years ago, you would feel a profound sense of order. The desert hills provided a natural fortress, protecting the valley from invasion, while the river provided a natural highway for trade and communication. It was a world of perfect balance, what they called Mot. The north wind blew south, allowing boats to sail upriver, while the current carried them north. Nature itself seemed to be in constant cooperation with the people. This geographical isolation created a unique psychology. The Egyptians felt they were at the center of the world, living in a garden protected by the gods. The river taught them that life is cyclical. Just as the sun sets in the west only to be reborn in the east, and just as the Nile recedes only to rise again, the human soul was believed to follow a path of eternal return. The river was the physical manifestation of this belief. It was the road that connected the world of the living with the kingdom of the dead. As the centuries passed, the mastery over the river became more sophisticated. They built nilometers, stone pillars etched with marks to measure the height of the flood. They developed irrigation systems that could carry the life-giving water to fields far from the banks. They learned to predict the exact day the star Sirius would rise in the dawn sky, signaling the beginning of the new year and the arrival of the flood. Science and spirituality were never separate, they were two ways of reading the same divine language. The Nile was also the great unifier. It was the thread that sewed together the scattered villages into a single, cohesive identity. Communication was swift and efficient. A message could travel from the delta in the north to the cataracts in the south in a matter of days. This connectivity allowed for the mobilization of labor on a scale never before seen in human history. The Great Pyramids and the massive temples were not just products of engineering, they were products of the river's ability to bring people together. When we look at the ruins of Egypt today, we see the bones of a civilization that aimed for the infinite. But we must remember that every stone was moved by people who drank from this river, who washed in its currents, and who found peace in its evening whispers. The reeds that grew along the banks became the papyrus that held their secrets. The mud of the riverbed became the bricks of their homes. The fish in the water and the birds in the marshes became the symbols of their gods. Imagine the sound of the water lapping against the wooden hull of a reed boat as the sun begins to dip below the horizon. The heat of the day is fading, replaced by a cool breeze that carries the scent of lotus flowers and wet earth. The white sails catch the last of the light, and for a moment, the world is suspended in a golden glow. This is the same light that the architects of the pyramids saw. This is the same breeze that cooled the brows of the pyramid builders. As the river continues its long journey toward the sea, it carries with it the memory of everything it has witnessed. It has seen the rise and fall of 30 dynasties. It has reflected the faces of conquerors and queens. It has survived the changing of religions and the turning of eras. Yet, the Nile remains, constant and changing all at once. It is a reminder that even the greatest human achievements are built upon the foundations of the natural world. The quiet power of the water is a meditation in itself. It does not hurry, yet it reaches its destination. It provides for everyone without exception. In the heart of the desert, it creates an oasis that has endured for millennia. To follow the Nile is to follow the history of human consciousness, moving from the simple need for water to the complex desire for immortality. As we move deeper into the mysteries of this ancient land, we leave the riverbanks and look toward the structures that rose from its silt. The transition from the fluid world of the water to the solid world of the stone is a journey of the mind. The river gave life, but the stone was meant to preserve it forever. The two are inseparable, a dialogue between the temporary and the eternal that defines the very essence of Egypt. The silence of the river at night is the same silence that filled the halls of the great temples. It is a silence that speaks of deep time and the enduring nature of the earth. We are merely travelers passing through this landscape, but the river and the history it holds are part of a much larger story, one that continues to flow long after the sun has set and the world has gone to sleep. The journey through the valley continues now, moving away from the water's edge and toward the secrets hidden within the very cells of those who once walked these shores. The focus shifts from the macrocosm of the landscape to the microcosm of the human body, as the quest for the eternal takes its most physical and scientific form. The river gave life to the valley, but the ancient mind was preoccupied with what happened when that life reached its sunset. In the shadow of the cliffs and the silence of the desert, a profound scientific quest began. It was a quest to cheat the natural law of decay and to turn the fragile human form into a vessel for eternity. We often think of mummification as a religious ritual, and it certainly was, but at its heart, it was an advanced application of chemistry, biology, and anatomy. It was a rigorous process that required 70 days of precise labor and a deep understanding of how the physical world interacts with the invisible forces of time. To preserve a body for thousands of years is to engage in a battle against moisture. The Egyptians observed that the desert sands naturally desiccated bodies, keeping them intact through the power of heat and dryness. They sought to replicate this natural miracle through artificial means. The key to this entire scientific endeavor was a substance called natron. Natron is a naturally occurring salt found in the dry lake beds of the desert. It is a complex mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, and its chemical properties are extraordinary. When a body is packed in natron, the salt begins to draw every molecule of water from the tissues. This process of dehydration is the most critical step in preventing the growth of bacteria and the onset of putrefaction. For 40 days, the body would rest in a bed of this salt, slowly losing its weight and its suppleness, until only the leathery, preserved essence remained. This was not a simple task of covering someone in salt, it was a carefully monitored chemical reaction. The practitioners knew exactly how long the process should take and how to prepare the skin so that it would not become too brittle. They were the world's first true chemists, working with the elements to halt the inevitable march of biology. Before the dehydration could begin, however, the internal chemistry of the body had to be addressed. The internal organs, which contain high amounts of water and enzymes, are the first parts of the anatomy to break down. The embalmers developed a sophisticated surgical knowledge to remove these organs with minimal damage to the exterior of the body. The lungs, the liver, the stomach, and the intestines were carefully extracted and treated with their own specific blends of spices and preservatives. Each organ was then placed in its own container, known today as a canopic jar. These jars were not merely decorative, they were functional storage units designed to keep the organic material stable for centuries. Interestingly, the heart was almost always left inside the chest. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence, memory, and the soul itself. While we now know the brain handles these functions, the ancient scientists saw the heart as the center of the human being. The brain, on the other hand, was often removed and discarded, as they did not yet understand its vital role in the nervous system. This choice reveals a fascinating intersection where spiritual belief dictated the direction of scientific practice. They were meticulous in what they kept and what they removed, driven by a blueprint of the afterlife that required a very specific physical preparation. Once the body was thoroughly dried by the natron, the art of restoration began. The hollowed cavity was often filled with linen, sawdust, or even lichen to maintain the human shape. The skin was then treated with a variety of precious oils and resins. These were not just for fragrance. Cedar oil, frankincense, and myrrh possess powerful antibacterial and antifungal properties. By massaging these into the skin, the embalmers were applying a protective layer that would ward off insects and microorganisms for millennia. The smell of an ancient Egyptian embalming studio would have been a heavy, intoxicating mix of pine, spice, and earth, a scent designed to bridge the gap between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. The final stage of this long scientific journey was the wrapping. Hundreds of yards of fine linen were used to swathe the body, creating a protective cocoon. Between the layers of linen, amulets made of gold, stone, and faience were placed. These were thought to provide spiritual protection, but the physical wrapping itself served a vital purpose. It kept the limbs in place and provided a final barrier against the elements. The resin used to seal the bandages would eventually harden into a shell as tough as modern plastic, creating a vacuum-sealed environment that defied the passage of the seasons. When we look at a mummy today, we are looking at a masterpiece of ancient bioengineering. We are seeing the result of thousands of years of trial and error, of observations made in the desert heat, and of a deep respect for the physical laws of the universe. The people who performed these tasks were not just priests. They were scientists who understood the properties of minerals, the anatomy of the human torso, and the long-term effects of environmental exposure. They looked at a human being and saw a structure that could be engineered to last forever. This obsession with preservation was not born out of a fear of death, but rather a profound love for life. They believed that the soul, or the ka, needed a physical home to return to. If the body vanished, the soul would be lost in the darkness of the void. Therefore, the preservation of the flesh was the ultimate act of devotion to the spirit. This belief drove them to reach levels of technical excellence that still baffle modern researchers. Even today, with all our modern technology, creating something that can withstand 5,000 years of time without significant degradation is a monumental challenge. As the body was laid in its tomb, surrounded by the items it would need in the next world, the work of the scientists was complete. They had handed the individual over from the realm of time to the realm of the eternal. The silence of the tomb became a laboratory of stillness, where the chemical reactions they had started would continue in the dark, shielded from the wind and the sun. The dry air of the desert worked in harmony with the salts and resins, creating a state of suspended animation that has allowed us to look into the faces of people who lived before the invention of the alphabet. But the quest for immortality did not stop with the body. To protect these precious vessels of the soul, the Egyptians needed structures that were as enduring as the mummies themselves. The engineering of the flesh led naturally to the engineering of the earth. If a body could be preserved through chemistry, then a tomb could be preserved through geometry and stone. The focus of their genius began to shift upward, from the microscopic level of cells and resins to the macroscopic level of mountains and monuments. The transition from the soft tissue of the human form to the hard, unyielding surface of the limestone is a shift in scale, but the goal remained the same. Everything was a preparation for a journey that never ended. As we leave the silent chambers where the embalmers worked their quiet magic, we move toward the horizon where the Great Pyramids stand against the stars. The science of the small becomes the science of the immense, and the pursuit of the eternal finds its most visible and lasting expression in the heavy, silent stones that rose from the sand. The air turns cooler as we step away from the oils and the linen, moving toward the vast plateaus where mathematics and gravity were harnessed to touch the sky. The preservation of a single life was the beginning, the construction of a monument for all time was the next step in the unfolding story of a civilization that refused to be forgotten. The preservation of the human body was a victory over biological decay, but the preservation of a legacy required a victory over gravity and time itself. To step onto the Giza Plateau is to leave behind the world of the organic and enter the world of the absolute. Here, the ancient mind expressed its most profound understanding of the universe through the language of geometry. The Great Pyramid is not merely a tomb. It is a mathematical statement rendered in 2,300,000 blocks of stone. It is the point where the earth reaches up to touch the heavens with a precision that continues to defy modern explanation. When we consider the construction of these monuments, we must first look at the orientation. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of within 3/60ths of a degree. This was achieved thousands of years before the invention of the compass or modern surveying tools. The architects did not look at the ground to find their way, they looked at the stars. By observing the circular motion of the circumpolar stars and bisecting the angles of their rising and setting, they found a line that was perfect and unchanging. This alignment was a bridge between the terrestrial and the celestial, ensuring that the king's final resting place was synchronized with the eternal gears of the cosmos. The scale of this achievement is difficult for the modern mind to grasp. Each block of limestone and granite weighs between 2 and 15 tons. These were not simply piled on top of one another. They were cut, transported, and placed with such exactness that in many areas, a single sheet of paper cannot be inserted between the joints. This level of craftsmanship suggests a society that did not view labor as a burden, but as a form of worship. Every measurement was a tribute to Maat, the goddess of truth, balance, and order. To build something crooked was to invite chaos, to build with perfection was to maintain the stability of the entire universe. The geometry of the pyramid itself reveals a deep knowledge of universal constants. If you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by twice the height, the result is incredibly close to the value of pi. While some scholars debate whether this was intentional or a natural result of the construction methods, the recurrence of such proportions across Egyptian architecture is striking. They also utilized the golden ratio, a mathematical proportion that appears throughout nature, from the spiral of a seashell to the arrangement of seeds in a flower. By incorporating these ratios into the stone, the architects were harmonizing their creations with the underlying blueprint of life itself. The logistics of moving these massive stones remains one of history's most peaceful mysteries. They did not use the wheel as we know it for heavy transport. Instead, they understood the physics of friction. Recent scientific experiments have shown that by wetting the sand in front of a massive sledge, the amount of force needed to pull it is reduced by half. This simple yet brilliant observation allowed teams of workers to move stones that weigh as much as modern locomotives. It was a triumph of human cooperation and a deep familiarity with the materials provided by the earth. Inside the pyramid, the geometry becomes even more complex. The descending and ascending passages are tilted at precise angles, directed toward specific regions of the night sky. The king's chamber, located deep within the heart of the structure, is a masterpiece of acoustic and structural engineering. The ceiling is composed of 9 massive granite beams, each weighing over 50 tons. Above these, the architects built a series of stress-relieving chambers to ensure that the weight of the millions of tons of stone above would not crush the empty space below. This was not just building, it was high-level physics practiced with bronze tools and hemp ropes. The silence inside these stone corridors is unlike any other silence on Earth. The massive thickness of the walls filters out all sound, all heat, and all light from the outside world. It is a place of total stillness, where time seems to lose its meaning. In this environment, the mathematical precision of the walls feels like a protective shield. The ancient builders were not just creating a box for a mummy, they were creating a machine for eternity. They believed that the shape of the pyramid, the Benben, represented the first dry land that rose from the primordial waters of creation. By placing the king within this shape, they were returning him to the moment the world began. As we visualize the plateau in its original state, we must imagine it covered in polished white Tura limestone. In the bright Egyptian sun, the pyramids would have been blindingly bright, reflecting the light like giant mirrors. At the very top, a capstone made of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, would have caught the first and last rays of the sun. They were beacons of order standing against the shifting sands of the desert. They were proof that the human mind could conceive of something grander than itself and bring it into physical reality. The construction of the pyramids also tells us about the social geometry of Egypt. These were not the products of slave labor, as was once commonly believed. Archaeological evidence from the workers' villages shows that the builders were skilled laborers, well-fed and cared for, who took immense pride in their contribution to the state. It was a national project that unified the country every year during the inundation of the Nile. When the fields were underwater and farming was impossible, the people traveled to Giza to lend their strength to the monuments. The pyramid was the physical manifestation of a unified people, all moving toward a single, divine goal. Mathematics, in the Egyptian view, was a sacred science. Numbers were not just tools for counting, they were the building blocks of reality. The square, the triangle, and the circle were seen as reflections of divine thoughts. When an architect laid out the foundation of a temple or a tomb, he was performing a ritual that mirrored the creation of the world. This is why the structures have lasted for nearly 5,000 years. They were built on truths that do not change. Wind, sand, and even the hands of men have tried to wear them down, but the underlying geometry remains as sharp and clear as the day it was conceived. To stand in the shadow of these giants is to feel the weight of history, but also the lightness of human potential. We see that with enough patience, enough cooperation, and a deep enough understanding of the laws of nature, we can create things that endure. The pyramids teach us that greatness is not found in speed, but in precision. It is not found in complexity, but in the elegant application of simple principles. The lines of the stone lead the eye upward, away from the dust and toward the infinite possibilities of the sky. As the sun sets behind the plateau, casting long, sharp shadows across the sand, we realize that the stone is just one part of the story. The geometry of the pyramids was meant to protect something far more fragile than limestone. It was built to house a legacy of words, thoughts, and names. The silence of the Great Pyramid is now ready to be filled with the sounds of a language that was lost for centuries but has recently begun to speak again. The hard edges of the stone soften as we move from the world of mathematics into the world of symbols and stories. The transition from the massive to the minute is a natural progression in our journey. Having mastered the earth and the stone, the ancient mind turned its attention to the mastery of the air and the mind through the invention of writing. The echoes of the construction site fade away, replaced by the soft scratch of a reed pen on papyrus. We move from the outer structure of the kingdom to the inner structure of its thoughts, where every line and every image carries the weight of 1,000 years of wisdom. The stars begin to appear above the apex of the stone, aligning perfectly with the shafts hidden deep within. The world is quiet, the desert is still, and the journey continues into the heart of the hidden language that gave these stones their names and their power. The massive stones of the pyramids provided a physical anchor for the kingdom, but it was the silent strokes of the reed pen that gave that kingdom its soul. In the ancient world, writing was not merely a way to record taxes or trade, it was a divine gift, a sacred technology believed to have been bestowed upon humanity by Thoth, the god of wisdom and the moon. They called their writing Mita, which translates to the words of the gods. To write a name was to give it life. To carve a story into stone was to make it eternal. As we move from the world of grand geometry into the intricate world of symbols, we enter a landscape where every image is a gateway to a deeper meaning. The development of hieroglyphics is one of the most remarkable achievements of human consciousness. Unlike modern alphabets, where letters represent sounds but have no visual connection to the world, hieroglyphics are a beautiful marriage of art and information. A bird is not just a sign for a sound, it is a depiction of the creature itself, carrying its own spirit and characteristics. However, the system was far more complex than simple picture writing. It was a sophisticated triple thread of phonograms representing sounds, ideograms representing ideas, and determinatives that provided context. This meant that a single inscription could be read on multiple levels, offering a literal meaning, a symbolic meaning, and a phonetic value all at once. To master this language required years of rigorous training. The scribes were the intellectual elite of Egypt, held in higher regard than almost any other profession. A young student would spend a decade or more in the House of Life, practicing the precise curves of a hawk's wing or the sharp angles of a reed. They learned that the placement of a sign was as important as the sign itself. Hieroglyphics could be written from left to right, right to left, or even vertically, depending on the aesthetic needs of the monument. The direction was always indicated by the figures of animals or humans, who would always face toward the beginning of the line, as if looking into the past to greet the reader. While the monumental inscriptions were carved into hard granite and limestone with copper chisels, the daily business of the empire was conducted on a much softer medium. This was the invention of papyrus, the world's first true paper. Along the marshy banks of the Nile grew a tall, triangular reed called Cyperus papyrus. The Egyptians discovered that by peeling the outer green skin and slicing the inner white pith into thin strips, they could create a writing surface that was light, durable, and flexible. By layering these strips horizontally and vertically, then pressing them together, the natural sap of the plant acted as a glue. Once dried and polished with a smooth stone, the result was a scroll that could hold the wisdom of 1,000 years. The scribes worked with simple tools that produced profound results. They used a palette made of wood with 2 circular wells for ink, red for titles and corrections, and black for the main body of the text. Their pens were made of rushes, the ends frayed to create a fine brush. With these humble instruments, they recorded everything from the movements of the stars to the inventory of grain in the royal granaries. They wrote hymns to the sun, epic poems of battle, and intimate letters of love and loss. In the silence of the library, the scratch of the rush on the papyrus was the only sound, a quiet rhythm that connected the thoughts of one person to the minds of generations yet unborn. There is a meditative quality to the way the Egyptians viewed their language. They believed that words had the power to create reality. If a pharaoh's name was erased from his monuments, his soul would wander the darkness, forgotten and nameless. Conversely, if his deeds were written in stone, he would live as long as the sun continued to rise. This is why the walls of tombs are covered in thousands of tiny, perfectly rendered figures. These were not just decorations, they were a form of magic. The spells from the Book of the Dead were intended to be read by the deceased, providing them with the secret names of the guardians of the underworld and the maps of the celestial paths. As the centuries turned into millennia, the knowledge of how to read these sacred signs was lost. The temples were closed, the scribes disappeared, and the stones of Egypt became silent. For nearly 1500 years, the world looked at the Sphinx and the pyramids and saw only mystery. Travelers from Europe and the East marveled at the figures of cats, snakes, and eyes, but they could no longer hear the voices behind them. The language of Thoth had become a visual puzzle that no one could solve, a locked door to a forgotten library. The key to that door was finally found in the sands of the delta, near a town called Rosetta. It was a slab of dark granodiorite inscribed with a royal decree in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and ancient Greek. Because the Greek could still be read, it provided a bridge to the lost language. Through the tireless work of scholars like Jean-François Champollion, the symbols began to speak again. He realized that the signs were not just mysterious symbols, but a living, breathing phonetic language. When he finally cracked the code, it was as if a great silence had been broken. The pharaohs, the priests, and the common people of the Nile Valley suddenly had their voices back. We now know that the Egyptians were a people of deep thought and meticulous record-keeping. Their language reflects a world where the natural and the divine were inseparable. A simple hieroglyph of a seated man with his hand to his mouth was the symbol for eating, but it was also the symbol for speaking, thinking, and feeling. It reminds us that for the ancient mind, the physical act and the internal experience were one and the same. Their writing was an attempt to capture the totality of human life and anchor it in the eternal. As we visualize the scribes of old, sitting cross-legged on the cool floors of the temples, we see a reflection of our own desire to be remembered. We see that the quest for knowledge is a journey that never truly ends. The ink may have faded on the ancient scrolls, and the colors on the tomb walls may have dimmed, but the intent remains. The words of the gods continue to resonate through time, inviting us to listen to the whispers of a civilization that understood the power of a single line to defy the darkness of oblivion. The focus of our journey now shifts from the symbols of the page to the symbols of the sky. The language of Thoth was a mirror of the world below, but the Egyptians knew that the world below was only a reflection of the world above. Having recorded the history of their land, they looked to the stars to understand the history of the universe. The scratch of the pen fades into the deep silence of the desert night, as we prepare to align our thoughts with the constellations that guided the kings through the darkness. The transition from the ink of the papyrus to the light of the stars is a movement from the human to the cosmic. The stories written on the earth find their completion in the patterns of the heavens. As the cool air of the night settles over the valley, we leave behind the libraries of the living and turn our gaze toward the celestial maps that charted the way to the infinite. The sky is vast and clear, a deep velvet canopy stretched over the silent monuments. Each star is a silent witness, and the journey continues into the ancient science of the heavens, where time is measured in eons and the soul finds its place among the immortal lights. The silent symbols of the papyrus scrolls were a mirror of the human mind, but the ancient Egyptians knew that the ultimate script was written in the stars. To look up at the night sky from the banks of the Nile is to see a celestial map that has guided travelers, farmers, and kings for thousands of years. In the dry, clear air of the desert, the stars do not just twinkle, they burn with a steady, cold light that feels close enough to touch. This was the laboratory of the first astronomers, who understood that the movements of the heavens were not random, but followed a divine and mathematical order. They saw the sky as a vast, blue ocean where the gods sailed in golden barks, and they sought to anchor that celestial harmony into the very stones of their temples and pyramids. The most famous of these alignments is found on the Giza Plateau. For decades, researchers have noted the striking correlation between the three Great Pyramids and the three stars of Orion's belt. In the Egyptian worldview, the constellation of Orion was the celestial manifestation of Osiris, the god of rebirth and the afterlife. By mirroring the pattern of these stars on the ground, the architects were not just building tombs, they were creating a terrestrial gateway to the stars. The shafts within the Great Pyramid, once thought to be simple air vents, are actually precision-engineered telescopes of stone. Thousands of years ago, these shafts pointed directly toward the specific regions of the sky where Orion and Sirius would pass, providing a direct path for the soul of the king to ascend and take its place among the imperishable lights. Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, held a position of supreme importance in the scientific and spiritual life of Egypt. They called it Sopdet. For many weeks each year, Sirius would disappear from the sky, hidden by the glare of the sun. Its return, known as the Heliacal Rising, occurred just before dawn in mid-July. This astronomical event was not merely a beautiful sight, it was a critical data point for the survival of the civilization. The reappearance of Sirius coincided almost exactly with the arrival of the Nile's annual flood. By tracking the star, the Egyptians could predict the coming of the water, allowing them to prepare their fields and irrigation systems. Science, agriculture, and the movements of the cosmos were woven into a single, seamless fabric of existence. This mastery of the sky required a level of observation that spanned centuries. They did not have glass lenses or metal telescopes, but they had something equally powerful: time and patience. They used simple tools like the merkit, a sighting instrument made of a horizontal bar and a plumb line. By aligning the merkit with the North Star, they could establish a perfect meridian line. This allowed them to measure the passage of time at night and to orient their buildings with a precision that rivals modern satellite surveying. When we say that a temple is aligned to the solstice, we are talking about a calculation that accounts for the tilt of the Earth's axis and the slow shift of the horizon over hundreds of years. The Great Temple of Abu Simbel is perhaps the most dramatic example of this solar engineering. Twice a year, on the 22nd of February and the 22nd of October, the rays of the rising sun travel 60 meters through the darkness of the temple's inner sanctum. The light pierces the gloom to illuminate the statues of the gods seated deep within the mountain. These dates were not chosen at random, they are believed to mark the anniversary of the Pharaoh's coronation and his birth. To achieve this, the engineers had to calculate the exact angle of the sun's path relative to the mountain's orientation, ensuring that the light would strike the faces of the statues at the precise moment of dawn. It is a symphony of light and stone that has performed perfectly for over 3,000 years. The alignment of stones was also a way of keeping time on a grand scale. The obelisks, those towering needles of red granite, acted as giant sundials. Their long shadows swept across the temple courtyards, marking the hours of the day and the changing of the seasons. The Egyptians were among the first to divide the day into 24 hours, a legacy that we still carry in our pockets today. They viewed time not as a straight line leading to an end, but as a series of concentric circles. There was the daily circle of the sun, the monthly circle of the moon, and the yearly circle of the stars. By building their world in alignment with these circles, they felt they were participating in the eternal rhythm of the universe. The stars also provided the map for the journey of the dead. The northern stars, which never set below the horizon, were called the Ekimoesike, or the followers of the sun who know no destruction. The Egyptians believed that these stars were the final destination for the purified soul, a place of eternal light where there was no darkness and no death. The pyramids were designed as launching pads for this journey, their sloped sides representing the rays of the sun descending to earth, providing a ramp for the spirit to climb back toward the celestial north. Every angle, every corridor, and every stone was a part of a vast, silent machine designed to facilitate this cosmic transit. In the temples of Dendera and Esna, we find magnificent zodiacs carved into the ceilings. These maps of the heavens show that the Egyptians had identified the constellations and the planets long before the rise of Greek astronomy. They recognized Mars, Venus, and Jupiter, describing them as stars that never rest. They understood the concept of the precession of the eons, the slow wobble of the earth that changes the orientation of the stars over thousands of years. Their records were so meticulous that they could track the subtle shifts in the heavens that take lifetimes to notice. This was a science of the long view, a commitment to understanding the universe that transcended the life of any single individual. As we stand in the center of a ruined temple at midnight, the silence of the stone seems to hum with the energy of the sky. The massive pillars, carved to look like bundles of papyrus, reach up toward the Milky Way, which the Egyptians saw as a heavenly Nile. There is a profound sense of peace in knowing that the people who built these structures looked at the same constellations we see tonight. They found comfort in the regularity of the heavens, a certainty that even in the darkest night, the sun would rise and the stars would return to their appointed places. The geometry of the earth and the geometry of the sky were one and the same. The temple was a microcosm of the universe, with the floor representing the earth, the pillars representing the atmosphere, and the ceiling representing the starry vault of heaven. To walk through a temple was to walk through the cosmos itself. This integration of architecture and astronomy created a sense of belonging, a feeling that human life was not an accident, but a vital part of a grand, celestial design. The air remains still and the stars continue their slow, silent dance above the valley. The focus now begins to turn inward, away from the distant lights of the galaxy and toward the human hearts that beat within these stone walls. Having charted the movements of the giants in the sky, we must now explore the psychology of the people who sought to emulate them. The transition from the cosmic to the personal is a journey into the mind of the pharaohs and the citizens of the Nile, where the laws of the stars became the laws of the land. The light of the distant suns fades into the soft glow of the morning, as the desert prepares to wake once more. The alignments of the stone remain, waiting for the next solstice, the next rising of Sirius, and the next generation of dreamers to look upward. The journey moves from the architecture of the heavens to the architecture of the soul, where the power of the gods and the will of humanity combine to create a society like no other. The horizon begins to glow with a faint, pale light, signaling the end of the night's watch. The stars are still there, hidden by the brilliance of the coming day, and the story of Egypt continues to unfold in the quiet transition between the world of the light and the world of the shadow. The stars in the sky and the stones on the plateau provided a framework for eternity, but the heart of the Egyptian civilization beat within the mind of a single individual. To understand the psychology of the pharaoh is to step into a consciousness that is fundamentally different from our own. Imagine waking every day not just as a man or a woman, but as a living God, a bridge between the chaotic forces of the universe and the fragile order of human society. This was not merely a position of political power, it was a cosmic burden. The pharaoh was the incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky, and the physical manifestation of the divine will on earth. This belief created a psychological landscape defined by absolute responsibility, profound isolation, and a relentless focus on the preservation of balance. The central concept in the mind of the pharaoh was Mot. Mot was more than just a word for justice or truth. It was the fundamental fabric of the universe. It was the rhythm of the seasons, the rising of the sun, and the annual flooding of the Nile. The primary duty of the pharaoh was to maintain Mot. If the king was weak, if his heart was heavy with greed or anger, then the universe itself would begin to unravel. The crops would fail, the river would not rise, and the enemies of Egypt would strike from the shadows of the desert. This meant that every action the pharaoh took, from the signing of a decree to the performance of a temple ritual, was seen as a vital maintenance of the cosmic engine. The psychological pressure of such a role is almost unimaginable, yet it was the foundation upon which 3,000 years of stability were built. From a very young age, a crown prince was trained to inhabit this divine identity. He was taught that his body belonged to the state and his soul belonged to the gods. He lived in a world of constant ceremony, where every movement was choreographed and every word was recorded. This lack of privacy and personal autonomy created a sense of self that was deeply intertwined with the identity of the nation. The pharaoh did not say "I want," he said "Egypt requires." This fusion of the personal and the national meant that the pharaoh's health and the nation's prosperity were viewed as one and the same. When the king was strong, the borders were secure. When the king grew old, the people felt the tremors of uncertainty, leading to elaborate rituals like the Sed festival, designed to magically rejuvenate the monarch's strength and restore the vitality of the land. The isolation of the pharaoh was both physical and spiritual. While he was surrounded by thousands of servants, priests, and advisors, he stood alone at the apex of the social pyramid. No one could touch him without permission, and few could look him directly in the eye. This created a profound psychological distance. He was a figure of awe and terror, but also a source of comfort. To the common farmer in the fields, the pharaoh was the reason the world made sense. He was the protector who kept the lions of the desert at bay and ensured that the grain storehouses were full. This relationship was not based on fear in the modern sense, but on a deep, reciprocal trust. The people gave their labor and their loyalty, and in return, the god-king gave them a world that was predictable and safe. However, the pharaoh was still a human being, made of flesh and blood, subject to the same fears and desires as anyone else. We see glimpses of this humanity in the quiet corners of history. We see it in the intimate statues of Akhenaten and his family, or in the grieving inscriptions left by fathers who lost their children. The tension between the divine mask and the human face must have been a constant presence in the royal palace. How does a person reconcile their own mortality with the fact that they are worshipped as an immortal? The answer lay in the construction of the tomb. The pharaoh's entire life was a preparation for the moment he would shed his earthly shell and return to the stars. The building of a pyramid or a valley tomb was not an act of vanity, it was a psychological necessity. It was the only way to ensure that the divine essence he carried would not be extinguished. The power of the pharaoh was also reflected in the architecture of the mind. The Egyptian state was one of the most organized and bureaucratic societies in history. This required a king who could delegate authority while maintaining an aura of absolute control. The pharaoh was the supreme judge, the high priest of every temple, and the commander-in-chief of the army. Even if he could not be everywhere at once, his image was. Every statue and every relief was a reminder of his presence. This created a psychological environment where the law was not an abstract concept, but a living, breathing force. To disobey the pharaoh was not just a crime, it was a sin against the natural order of the world. As we look at the faces of the pharaohs carved in granite, we see a recurring expression of serene detachment. The eyes are wide and clear, looking toward the horizon rather than at the viewer. The lips are set in a slight, enigmatic smile. This was the ideal of the royal psychology, the calm in the center of the storm. A pharaoh was expected to be stoic, wise, and unmoved by the petty emotions of the moment. He was the anchor of the state, the one who remained still while the river of time flowed around him. This mask of divinity was so effective that it allowed the Egyptian civilization to survive periods of famine, civil war, and foreign invasion, always returning to the central idea of the divine king as the source of all order. The transition of power from one pharaoh to the next was a moment of extreme psychological tension for the entire country. The death of a king was seen as the setting of the sun. For a brief moment, the world was in darkness, and the forces of chaos threatened to return. The coronation of the new king was the sunrise, the restoration of light and Ma'at. This cycle gave the people a sense of continuity that spanned centuries. They knew that while individual kings might pass away, the office of the pharaoh was eternal. This belief provided a psychological stability that is rare in human history, allowing a culture to maintain its core values and artistic style for thousands of years without radical change. In the later years of the empire, as foreign powers began to press against the borders, the psychology of the pharaoh shifted toward a more militaristic and defensive posture. The warrior kings of the new kingdom, like Ramesses II, projected an image of invincible power, covering the walls of their temples with scenes of their triumphs in battle. Yet, even in these displays of might, the underlying goal was the same: the protection of the Black Land and the preservation of the ancient peace. They were still the guardians of the balance, fighting to keep the desert from swallowing the garden. As the desert wind whispers through the ruins of the royal palaces, we are reminded that the pharaohs were the architects not just of stone, but of a collective dream. They convinced a whole nation to look at the world through the lens of the eternal. They taught their people that every life had a place in a grand design, and that death was merely a transition to a higher state of being. The psychology of the pharaoh was the engine of Egypt, a unique blend of divine confidence and human duty that created a world of unmatched beauty and endurance. The focus of our journey now begins to shift from the heights of the royal throne to the depths of the earth and the water. Having explored the mind of the one who ruled the land, we must now explore the secrets of the world that lay beneath his feet and beyond his shores. The transition from the human heart to the hidden depths of the earth is a descent into the unknown. The golden crowns and the stone masks fade into the blue shadows of the water, where nature holds its own court and the mysteries of the deep wait to be revealed. The morning light begins to touch the tops of the desert hills, illuminating the path ahead. The kingdom is vast, and its secrets are not all found in the sunlight. The journey continues toward the edge of the world, where the land meets the sea and the silent wonders of the submerged past wait in the cool, dark currents. The golden throne of the pharaoh and the dry heat of the desert plateau are left behind as we move toward the edge of the continent. Here, the land does not simply end, it surrenders to the deep blue embrace of the Mediterranean Sea. For centuries, the city of Alexandria was the intellectual and cultural capital of the world, a place where the wisdom of Egypt met the philosophy of Greece. But time and the restless earth had other plans for this coastal jewel. Due to a series of cataclysmic earthquakes and tsunamis that occurred over 1,000 years ago, entire districts of the royal quarter slid into the ocean. Today, we must descend beneath the waves to find the silent witnesses of a drowned empire. As you drift down into the cool, emerald silence of the harbor, the light from the surface begins to fade into a soft, ethereal glow. The sound of the wind and the desert sand is replaced by the rhythmic pulse of the water. Below, resting on the seabed, lies a landscape that feels like a dream. This is the palace of Cleopatra and the foundations of the legendary Pharaohs lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They are not lost, they are merely sleeping in a world where time is measured by the slow accumulation of silt and the gentle swaying of sea grass. The preservation provided by the water is different from that of the desert. While the dry sand mummifies, the sea encrusts. Gigantic statues of kings and queens, carved from red granite and black basalt, lie prostrate on the ocean floor. Their features are softened by the growth of tiny marine organisms, yet their majesty remains undiminished. To see a 5-meter-tall Sphinx resting among the coral is to realize that human history is a fragile layer on the surface of a much older and more powerful natural world. These monuments were built to stand for eternity under the sun, yet they have spent more than a millennium in the dark, surrounded by the creatures of the deep. Underwater archaeology is a science of patience and precision. Unlike excavations on land, every movement must be calculated to avoid disturbing the delicate sediments that have protected these artifacts for centuries. Divers use vacuum hoses to gently whisk away the sand, revealing treasures that have not seen the light of day since the time of the Roman emperors. They have found gold jewelry, bronze vessels, and even tiny incense burners still sitting where they fell during the final moments of the city's collapse. These objects tell a story of a sudden and dramatic end, a moment when the earth shook and the sea claimed its due. The most striking finds in the sunken city of Heracleion, which served as the gateway to Egypt before Alexandria was built, are the colossal statues of the god Hapi. As the god of the Nile's flood, it is a profound irony that his image now rests at the bottom of the sea. These statues, some weighing over 6 tons, were raised from the depths using massive cranes, emerging from the water like ghosts returning from the afterlife. The sight of a stone god rising through the surface, dripping with salt water and covered in the marks of the deep, is a reminder of the enduring power of Egyptian art. Even after 1,000 years underwater, the expression on the faces is as serene and commanding as the day they were carved. The submerged ruins also offer a unique glimpse into the daily life of a bustling port. Archaeologists have mapped out the ancient harbor walls, the shipyards, and the remains of over 60 shipwrecks. These vessels, some still carrying their cargo of amphorae and stone, are time capsules of ancient commerce. We see how the wealth of the Mediterranean flowed into Egypt, and how the grain of the Nile Valley was shipped out to feed the distant cities of the north. The sea has acted as a giant museum, protecting the wood and the organic materials that would have rotted away long ago if they had stayed on land. In the silence of the underwater city, the geography of the past becomes clear. You can follow the lines of the ancient streets, now paved with shells and sand. You can see the fallen columns of temples where priests once performed rituals to ensure the safety of sailors. There is a haunting beauty to this drowned world. It is a place where the boundaries between the human and the elemental have dissolved. The stone pillars that once supported heavy roofs now provide a home for schools of silver fish. The courtyards where philosophers once debated the nature of the soul are now filled with the slow, undulating movements of the currents. This submerged landscape also teaches us about the resilience of the earth. The earthquakes that destroyed Alexandria were a reminder that the stable ground we walk upon is always in motion. The Egyptians, who prized stability and Ma'at above all else, had to reckon with a world that could occasionally be chaotic and unpredictable. Yet, even in the face of such destruction, the essence of their culture endured. The stories of the lost city lived on in the writings of travelers and historians, becoming a myth that inspired generations of explorers to search the dark waters. As we look at the artifacts recovered from the harbor, we see a fusion of styles. This was the era of the Ptolemies, when Egyptian traditions were blended with Hellenistic aesthetics. A statue might have the pose of a traditional pharaoh but the facial features of a Greek king. This cultural layering is a testament to the adaptability of the Egyptian spirit. They took the new and integrated it into the old, creating a vibrant, cosmopolitan society that was the envy of the world. Alexandria was a lighthouse in every sense of the word, a beacon of knowledge and trade that shone across the sea. The transition from the sun-drenched desert to the blue shadows of the Mediterranean is a reminder that history has many layers. Some are written in the stars, some are carved in the cliffs, and some are hidden beneath the waves. To understand the totality of Egypt, we must be willing to dive deep and look at what has been hidden. The silence of the underwater world is a different kind of peace, a heavy and enveloping stillness that invites us to let go of the noise of the modern world and listen to the echoes of the deep. The water remains cool and the light continues to dance in long, shimmering columns through the depths. Having explored the wonders that were claimed by the sea, we must now return to the surface and look at the vibrant colors and precious materials that the Egyptians used to decorate their world. The journey moves from the blue shadows of the harbor to the brilliant hues of the artist's palette. We transition from the massive stone ruins of the seabed to the microscopic beauty of pigments and the golden shimmer of the forge. The bubbles from our ascent rise toward the surface, sparkling like diamonds in the sun. The ocean floor remains behind us, a quiet kingdom of statues and sand, as we prepare to explore the chemistry of beauty and the enduring glow of the metals that the Egyptians believed were the flesh of the gods. The world above is bright and warm, and the story of Egypt continues to unfold, moving from the mysteries of the deep to the brilliance of the light, where color and gold become the bridge to the divine. The blue shadows of the Mediterranean have been left behind, and as we return to the sunlight of the Nile Valley, we are met with a world of vibrant brilliance. To the ancient Egyptians, color was not merely an aesthetic choice, it was a fundamental property of matter, a sacred code that revealed the true nature of an object or a being. They did not just see a red stone or a blue sky, they saw the living essence of life, death, and the divine. This profound connection to the visual world led them to become the world's first master chemists. In their workshops, they developed techniques to create pigments and refine metals that have remained bright and untarnished for thousands of years, defying the corrosive breath of time. At the heart of this artistic and scientific mastery was the creation of the substance known as Egyptian blue. This was the world's first synthetic pigment, a testament to the experimental genius of the ancient mind. By heating a precise mixture of silica, lime, copper, and an alkali like natron to temperatures exceeding 850 degrees Celsius, they created a beautiful, glass-like blue crystal. They did not stumble upon this by accident. They understood the chemical reactions required to produce a stable, light-fast color that would never fade, even under the intense glare of the Egyptian sun. This blue was the color of the heavens and the deep water, used to decorate the ceilings of tombs so that the deceased would always be under a celestial canopy. The Egyptian palette was limited to a few primary colors, but each was treated with the reverence of a religious ritual. White, derived from gypsum or chalk, represented purity and sacredness. Black, made from carbon or ground stibnite, was the color of the fertile Nile silt and symbolized rebirth and the potential for new life. Red, often sourced from iron oxides or ochre, was the color of blood and fire, but also of the protective sun. Yellow and gold represented the eternal and the indestructible. To look at an Egyptian painting is to read a symphony of these elemental forces, carefully balanced to create a sense of harmony and mot. The binders used to hold these pigments together were equally sophisticated. They used plant gums, beeswax, and egg whites to create a medium that was both fluid and durable. These substances allowed the artists to apply the color in smooth, even layers that bonded with the limestone walls of the temples. The reason these colors remain so vivid today, thousands of years after they were applied, is due to the chemical stability of the mineral-based pigments and the dry, protective environment of the desert. When we step into a newly discovered tomb, the reds, yellows, and blues appear as fresh as if the artist had just laid down his brush an hour ago. If color was the language of the soul, then gold was the flesh of the gods. The Egyptians believed that the skin of the deities was made of pure gold, and that the moon and stars were made of silver. This spiritual belief drove an incredible level of metallurgical innovation. Gold was mined from the quartz veins in the eastern desert and the mountains of Nubia, a word that itself is derived from the ancient Egyptian word for gold, nub. They developed advanced techniques for crushing the ore and washing the gold, separating the precious metal from the stone with a mastery of gravity and water. Once the gold reached the royal workshops, it was transformed into objects of breathtaking beauty. The goldsmiths were among the most highly skilled artisans in the kingdom, capable of beating the metal into sheets so thin they would flutter in a light breeze. They mastered the art of lost wax casting, allowing them to create intricate, three-dimensional statues of gods and pharaohs. They also excelled in cloisonné, a technique where thin strips of gold are used to create small cells that are then filled with semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise. The contrast between the warm glow of the gold and the deep, cool colors of the stones created a visual representation of the balance between the earth and the sky. Silver was also highly prized, often considered more valuable than gold in the earlier periods because it was rarer in the Egyptian landscape. They called it white gold. The technology required to refine silver and create alloys was a delicate science, involving the precise control of furnace temperatures and the use of fluxes to remove impurities. These metals were not just for jewelry. They were for the creation of sacred vessels, mirrors that reflected the divine light, and the massive doors of the inner sanctuaries where the gods were said to dwell. The chemistry of beauty extended to the human body as well. The Egyptians were the pioneers of cosmetics, creating eyeliners and ointments that served both medical and spiritual purposes. The iconic black coal used around the eyes was made from ground galena, a mineral of lead. Recent scientific studies have shown that this substance had antibacterial properties, protecting the eyes from infections and the harsh glare of the sun. They also created green eyeshadow from malachite and used henna to dye their hair and nails. For the Egyptians, looking beautiful was a way of honoring the life they had been given and preparing for the beauty of the afterlife. In the quiet of the artisan's workshop, the fire of the furnace was a sacred element. It was the force that transformed raw earth into liquid gold and dull minerals into brilliant pigments. There was a deep understanding that everything in the world was connected, that the stone from the desert, the plant from the river, and the fire from the hearth could be combined to create something that transcended the physical world. This was the true alchemy of Egypt, the transformation of the temporary into the eternal through the mastery of the elements. As we visualize the master painters and goldsmiths at work, we see a culture that did not distinguish between art and science. To them, a beautiful object was a successful experiment in chemistry, and a well-made pigment was a form of prayer. They sought to capture the colors of the universe and anchor them in the human world. Every golden mask and every painted wall was a statement of faith in the permanence of the soul. They were building a world that was meant to be seen not just by the living, but by the gods themselves. The brilliant reds and shimmering golds begin to soften as the evening light fades once more. The heat of the forge and the vibrant energy of the palette give way to a different kind of science, one focused on the healing of the body and the secrets of the natural world. Having mastered the chemistry of minerals and metals, the ancient mind turned its attention to the chemistry of life itself. The journey moves from the artist's studio to the quiet gardens of the healers, where the plants of the Nile and the wisdom of the ages combine to ward off the shadows of illness. The air is filled with the scent of drying herbs and the cool moisture of the river. The brilliant colors of the temple walls remain etched in our memory as we move toward the softer hues of the medicinal garden. The story of Egypt continues, transitioning from the brilliance of the light to the gentle power of the earth, where the science of medicine and the spirit of healing wait to be explored. The stars are beginning to emerge, reflecting the gold and the blue we have seen today, and the journey flows onward through the quiet, healing night of the ancient valley. The brilliant pigments of the temple walls and the shimmering gold of the royal masks were designed to capture the essence of the eternal, but the ancient Egyptians were also deeply concerned with the fragile reality of the present. Life along the Nile was a gift, yet it was a gift that required constant care and a sophisticated understanding of the human body. In the quiet gardens of the healers and the busy corridors of the House of Life, a medical tradition was born that combined rigorous observation with a deep spiritual connection to the natural world. To the Egyptian physician, the body was not a collection of parts, but a system of channels, much like the irrigation canals that fed the Black Land. If the channels were clear, health would flow; if they were blocked, the shadows of illness would take hold. The primary source of our understanding of this ancient science comes from documents like the Edwin Smith Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus. These are not merely lists of spells, but medical textbooks that reveal a surprising level of anatomical knowledge. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, in particular, focuses on surgery and trauma. It describes 48 different clinical cases, ranging from head injuries to spinal fractures. Each case follows a logical progression. The examination, the diagnosis, the treatment, and the prognosis. This systematic approach is the very foundation of the modern clinical method. Long before the rise of Greek medicine, the healers of the Nile were practicing a form of evidence-based science, identifying the symptoms of a concussion or the physical signs of a broken rib with a clarity that still impresses modern doctors. The Egyptian pharmacy was a vast and diverse collection of substances derived from the earth, the plants, and the animals of the river valley. One of their most effective and widely used treatments was honey. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that honey possessed powerful antibacterial properties. It was used as a primary dressing for wounds and surgical incisions, preventing infection and promoting the growth of new tissue. They also utilized resins like frankincense and myrrh, which acted as natural antiseptics. In a world where the smallest scratch could become life-threatening, these simple but effective treatments were the difference between a quick recovery and a slow decline. The use of plants was equally sophisticated. They harvested the willow tree for its bark, which we now know contains salicin, a precursor to modern aspirin. They used it to treat pain and reduce fever, a practice that has continued in various forms for thousands of years. They turned to the poppy for its sedative effects and to the seeds of the castor plant as a powerful laxative. Each plant was seen as a gift from the gods, carrying within it a specific vibratory frequency that could counteract the disharmony of disease. The garden of the healer was a living library, where the secrets of health were hidden in the curve of a leaf or the bitterness of a root. Anatomy was a subject of intense study, facilitated by the unique cultural practice of mummification. While the embalmers were not physicians, their work provided a map of the internal organs that was unavailable to most other ancient cultures. The doctors knew the location of the heart, the lungs, the liver, and the kidneys. They understood the pulse, describing it as the heart speaking through the vessels to every limb. While they believed the heart was the center of thought and emotion, they also recognized the brain's connection to physical movement, noting that an injury to one side of the head could cause paralysis on the opposite side of the body. This observation of the nervous system was a monumental leap in human understanding. The relationship between the physician and the patient was one of deep trust and spiritual alignment. A doctor was often a priest as well, beginning his work with a quiet prayer to Thoth or Sekhmet, the goddess of healing and destruction. This was not seen as a replacement for physical treatment, but as a way of preparing the mind and the soul for the process of recovery. They understood the psychosomatic nature of health, that a worried mind could hinder the healing of a physical wound. By creating a sense of calm and invoking the protection of the divine, the physician was activating the body's own natural ability to repair itself. Surgery was practiced with tools made of copper and bronze. They had scalpels, forceps, and needles for suturing. Archaeological evidence has revealed skulls that show signs of successful trepanation, the removal of a piece of bone to relieve pressure on the brain, where the patient lived for many years after the procedure. They were also skilled in dentistry, using gold wire to bridge loose teeth and creating toothpastes from ground pumice and vinegar. They viewed the mouth as a gateway to the rest of the body, recognizing that dental health was essential for overall well-being. The Nile itself was a source of both health and hazard. While its water gave life, it also carried parasites and insects that could bring fever and skin conditions. To combat these, the Egyptians developed a high standard of personal hygiene. They bathed frequently, used oils to protect their skin from the sun, and were meticulous about the cleanliness of their clothing. Their medical texts even include advice on how to repel crocodiles and treat snake bites, reflecting a science that was deeply rooted in the practical realities of their environment. As we look at the legacy of Egyptian medicine, we see a culture that was both humble and ambitious. They recognized the limits of their knowledge, often labeling a case as something they could not treat, yet they never stopped searching for new ways to alleviate suffering. They saw the human body as a sacred vessel, a masterpiece of divine engineering that deserved the highest level of care. This respect for life is what allowed their medical tradition to endure for millennia, influencing the healers of Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world. The quiet of the medicinal garden is a place of profound peace. Here, the hum of the bees in the flowers and the soft rustle of the papyrus reeds create a natural soundtrack for the work of healing. The physician moves slowly, selecting a leaf here and a root there, his movements guided by a wisdom that has been passed down through generations of scribes and healers. There is a sense of timelessness in this work, a feeling that the quest for health is as old as the river itself. The shadows of the afternoon begin to lengthen, and the air turns cool and fragrant with the scent of mint and lotus. Having explored the science of the body and the secrets of the garden, we must now move toward the end of our journey through the ancient land. The transition from the world of the living and the healing to the world of the ancestors is a natural part of the Egyptian cycle. We move from the riverbank to the edge of the desert, where the history of the earth and the stories of the people are buried in the deep time of the archaeological record. The stars are once again appearing in the sky, the same stars that the physicians looked upon for guidance and hope. The journey through the science of the Nile is reaching its final chapters, moving from the microscopic world of herbs to the macroscopic world of time and memory. The light of the day fades into the deep, healing silence of the night, as we prepare to look back at the eons that have passed and the mysteries that still wait to be uncovered. The world is still, the river flows quietly, and the story of Egypt moves toward its conclusion, where the echoes of the past find their place in the stillness of the eternal present. The healing sense of the medicinal gardens and the rhythmic pulse of life along the riverbank are now behind us. As we move toward the vast, fan-shaped expanse of the Nile Delta, we are not just traveling through space, but through the very layers of time itself. To the modern eye, the delta is a lush, green landscape of infinite fertility, but to the archaeologist and the historian, it is a deep archive of human existence. Beneath the silt deposited by thousands of annual floods lie the remains of cities, temples, and villages that existed long before the first pyramid was ever conceived. This is the realm of deep time, where the science of stratigraphy allows us to peel back the earth like the pages of a forgotten book, revealing the slow and steady evolution of a civilization that refused to be washed away. The study of the delta is a unique challenge for the scientific mind. Unlike the dry, preserving sands of Upper Egypt, the delta is a land of moisture and shifting mud. Here, the preservation of history is a battle against the elements. Yet, it is precisely this environment that has created a different kind of record. As the river overflowed its banks each year, it brought with it a fresh layer of fine, black silt. This silt did not just nourish the crops. It acted as a protective shroud, burying the discarded pottery, the fallen walls, and the humble hearths of the common people. In the vertical sections of an archaeological trench, we see these layers, the stratigraphy, as a chronological map. Each centimeter of earth represents decades of human labor, joy, and struggle, stacked one on top of the other in a silent, compressed history of the world. Archaeology in the Delta is a science of the minute. While the great monuments of Giza capture the imagination with their scale, it is the broken shard of a beer jar or the charred remains of a grain of emmer wheat that tell the true story of how Egypt began. By analyzing the chemical composition of clay or the microscopic patterns of pollen trapped in the mud, scientists can reconstruct the climate and the diet of people who lived 6,000 years ago. We find that before there were pharaohs and golden crowns, there were communities of farmers and fishers who had already mastered the art of living in harmony with the river. They understood the seasons, they developed the first irrigation techniques, and they created a social structure that would eventually support the building of the Great Sphinx. The concept of time in ancient Egypt was not a simple line leading from the past to the future. It was a dual experience. They recognized Nihe, the cyclical time of the sun, the stars, and the seasons, and Jet, the eternal, unchanging time of the ancestors and the gods. The delta is where these two forms of time met. Every year, the flood would erase the boundaries of the fields, returning the land to a state of primordial chaos, only for the water to reseed and life to begin anew. This constant cycle of destruction and rebirth gave the Egyptians a profound sense of continuity. They saw themselves as part of a story that had no beginning and no end, a narrative written in the very soil they walked upon. As we visualize the archaeologists at work in the humid heat of the delta, we see them using brushes and trowels to gently coax the past from the grip of the earth. They find the foundations of Tanis and Avaris, cities that were once the bustling hubs of international trade, now reduced to outlines in the mud. In these ruins, we find evidence of Egypt's early contact with the wider world, pottery from the Levant, obsidian from the Aegean, and lapis lazuli from the distant mountains of the east. The delta was the gateway through which the ideas and the materials of other cultures entered the Nile Valley, enriching the local traditions and creating a cosmopolitan society that was always evolving, even as it remained rooted in its ancient ways. The science of deep time also teaches us about the fragility of human achievement. We see evidence of periods when the Nile failed to rise, leading to famine and social collapse. We see the layers of ash that mark the burning of a palace or the invasion of a foreign power. These layers are the scars of history, reminding us that even the most powerful empire is subject to the whims of nature and the passage of the years. Yet, above every layer of ash, there is always a new layer of building. The Egyptians were a resilient people, always returning to the river, always replanting their crops, and always rebuilding their temples. Their history is not a story of a single, static greatness, but a story of constant adaptation and persistence. One of the most moving discoveries in the deep time of the Delta are the simple burials of the pre-dynastic period. Here, individuals were laid to rest in a fetal position, facing the west, accompanied by a few simple pots and flint tools. There were no elaborate mummies yet, no stone sarcophagi, and no gold masks. But the intent was already there, the belief that the human spirit continues after the body stops breathing. These humble graves are the seeds from which the entire funerary culture of Egypt grew. They remind us that the quest for immortality did not begin with the pharaohs, it began with the first people who looked at the setting sun and wondered where it went at night. The silence of the archaeological site at dusk is a powerful thing. As the workers put away their tools and the dust settles, the mounds of earth, the tells, begin to look like natural hills. But beneath the grass and the wildflowers, the walls of ancient houses are still standing, their mud bricks holding the warmth of the sun just as they did thousands of years ago. To walk on a tell is to walk on the shoulders of giants. It is to realize that our own time is just one more layer being added to the stack, a thin crust on the surface of a deep and ancient world. The science of the earth provides a perspective that is both humbling and expanding. It forces us to look beyond our own short lifespans and see ourselves as part of a much larger process. The delta, with its endless cycles of silt and water, is a monument to the endurance of life. It tells us that nothing is ever truly lost. It is only buried, waiting for a future generation to find it and give it a name. The deep time of the earth is a reservoir of memory, a silent library where the history of humanity is kept safe in the cool, dark embrace of the mud. The air over the delta is heavy with moisture and the scent of growing things. The transition from the depths of the earth to the reaches of the prehistoric past is almost complete. Having explored the physical layers of time, we must now move toward the origins of the human story in the Nile Valley, the era of the first settlers and the dawn of the civilization. The journey moves from the archaeological trench to the prehistoric horizon, where the first fires were lit and the first words were spoken. The sun begins to set over the vast green expanse, casting long shadows that accentuate the undulations of the ancient tells. The river continues its journey toward the sea, carrying the silt that will one day become the history of the future. The story of Egypt is reaching back toward its very beginning, into the mist of the prehistoric dawn, where the path of the ancestors first touched the banks of the eternal Nile. The stars begin to appear, reflecting in the still waters of the irrigation canals, and the journey flows onward through the deep, quiet time of the ancient delta, where every grain of sand carries the weight of an eon. The deep layers of the Nile Delta have shown us how time accumulates, but to find the very beginning of the Egyptian soul, we must travel back even further into the mist of the prehistoric dawn. Long before the first hieroglyph was carved or the first stone of a pyramid was laid, the Nile Valley was a wild and untamed landscape. It was a world of vast marshlands, thick papyrus jungles, and dangerous predators. To the west and east, the deserts were not yet the scorched voids we know today, but savannas teeming with life, nourished by seasonal rains that have long since vanished. In this ancient theater of nature, the first groups of humans began to settle, moving away from a life of constant wandering to forge a permanent bond with the river. This was the moment of transition from the hunter to the harvester, the spark that would eventually ignite the greatest civilization in history. The science of prehistory is a journey into a world without written words. Here, the evidence is found in the weight of a hand axe, the curve of a clay bowl, and the mysterious figures painted on the walls of remote desert caves. Archaeologists look at these silent artifacts to reconstruct the cognitive map of the early inhabitants. They find that the people of the Badarian and Nakata cultures were already master craftsmen. Their flint tools were not merely functional. They were works of art, pressure flaked to achieve an edge of surgical sharpness and a symmetry that suggests a deep appreciation for geometric order. These early settlers were observing the world with a scientific eye, learning the properties of different stones, the seasonal migrations of animals, and the mysterious power of the annual flood. The transition to agriculture was a monumental shift in human consciousness. By choosing to plant a seed and wait for the harvest, the early Egyptians were making a commitment to the future. They were learning the language of the soil and the rhythm of the water. This required a new kind of social organization, a way for groups of people to work together to dig the first irrigation ditches and protect the precious grain from the scavengers of the wild. In the small, circular huts of these early villages, we see the beginnings of the Egyptian house. We see the first communal hearths where stories were told and the first religious ideas were formed. They began to see the Nile not just as a source of water, but as a living deity, a provider of life whose cycles determined their own survival. One of the most hauntingly beautiful records of this prehistoric era is found in the rock art of the Eastern Desert and the Gilf Kabir. Deep in the heart of the wilderness, ancient artists painted scenes of giraffes, ostriches, and long-horned cattle. Most strikingly, they painted boats, long, slender vessels with many oars, navigating a landscape that is now a sea of sand. These images tell us that the connection to the water was there from the very beginning. The boat was the first vehicle of the imagination, a way to transcend the limitations of the shore. Even in this early dawn, the people were looking beyond the horizon, dreaming of what lay at the source of the river and what waited in the great green sea to the north. The burial practices of the prehistoric period reveal a developing belief in the afterlife that was already surprisingly complex. In sites like Hierakonpolis, we find graves where the deceased were buried with precious objects, pallets for grinding eye paint, ivory combs, and finely decorated pottery. These were not just items of daily use, they were equipment for an eternal journey. The orientation of the bodies, always curled in a fetal position and facing the west where the sun sets, shows a profound understanding of the solar cycle. They saw that the sun died every evening only to be reborn every morning, and they drew the natural conclusion that human life must follow the same sacred pattern. The seed that is buried in the earth rises as a golden stalk of wheat, the human that is buried in the sand must surely rise in another world. The psychology of these early people was shaped by the constant presence of the wild. They lived in a world where the boundary between the human and the animal was thin. They respected the strength of the lion, the cunning of the jackal, and the protective fury of the hippopotamus. We see these animals appearing in their art and eventually becoming the foundations of their complex pantheon of gods. The god Anubis began as the jackal that prowled the edges of the desert. The goddess Sekhmet began as the fierce lioness of the sun. By incorporating the traits of these animals into their spiritual life, the prehistoric Egyptians were attempting to harmonize themselves with the raw forces of nature. They were not trying to conquer the wild, but to find their rightful place within it. The development of the first copper tools during the Chalcolithic period was another leap forward. The early metallurgists were beginning to experiment with the transformative power of fire, turning green stones into red metal. This was the birth of the chemistry we explored in later chapters, a science born of curiosity and the need to improve the efficiency of labor. With copper chisels and drills, they could work harder stones and create more permanent structures. The humble mud brick, made from the silt of the river and dried in the sun, became the building block of the first towns. These small settlements would eventually grow and merge, forming the first administrative districts, or nomes, that would remain the geographic units of Egypt for thousands of years. As we stand in the stillness of a prehistoric site at dawn, the air feels charged with the energy of those first pioneers. You can almost hear the rhythmic chipping of the flint knapper and the distant call of a hunter across the savanna. There is a profound sense of continuity in this landscape. The same wind that cooled the brow of a farmer 6,000 years ago is blowing today. The same sun that ripened the first crops is rising over the cliffs. The prehistoric dawn is not a distant, dead thing, it is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Without the courage of these early settlers and their willingness to dream of a stable world, the grand monuments of the pharaohs would never have existed. The prehistoric era reminds us that civilization is a choice. It is a decision to value the community over the individual, the future over the present, and the orderly over the chaotic. The early Egyptians chose the path of Mot long before they had a word for it. They sought balance in a world of extremes, finding a way to thrive in a land of flood and drought, sun and shadow. Their legacy is written in the very DNA of the culture, a spirit of resilience and creativity that would endure through every dynasty and every invasion. The soft light of the early morning begins to burn away the mist, revealing the familiar curves of the Nile Valley. The journey through the deep past has brought us to the threshold of the modern world. Having explored the origins of the human story, we are now ready to look at how this ancient wisdom is being rediscovered through the science of today. The transition from the prehistoric horizon to the digital age is a bridge across time. We move from the hand axe and the rock painting to the satellite image and the genetic sequence, as we prepare to see how the secrets of the past are being unlocked by the technology of the future. The river continues its steady flow, a silver thread connecting the beginning of time to the present moment. The story of Egypt is a circle, returning to the source only to find that the source is everywhere. The prehistoric dawn fades into the clear light of day, leaving us with a sense of wonder at the enduring power of the human spirit to find meaning in the silence of the earth. The world is waking up, and the ancient echoes are joined by the sounds of the modern day. The journey through the science and silence of the Nile is reaching its final destination, where the wisdom of the ancestors meets the curiosity of the new age. The mist of the prehistoric dawn has cleared, and as the sun of the modern age rises high over the Nile, we find ourselves in a world where the ancient and the futuristic are no longer separate entities. For centuries, archaeology was a science of the shovel and the brush, a physical struggle to wrest secrets from the stubborn earth. Today, while the touch of the human hand remains essential, the quest for knowledge has expanded into the digital realm. We are witnessing a technological renaissance, a moment in time where satellites in the silent vacuum of space and supercomputers in high-tech laboratories are working together to breathe life back into the dust of the Pharaohs. This is the era of digital resurrection, where the silence of the stones is being translated into the language of data, allowing us to see through the sand and across the millennia with a clarity that our ancestors could only imagine. The view from above has fundamentally changed our understanding of the Egyptian landscape. Space archaeology, utilizing high-resolution satellite imagery and infrared thermal sensors, has revealed a hidden world beneath the surface of the desert. Because ancient mud bricks are denser than the surrounding soil, they retain heat differently. From hundreds of kilometers above the earth, these thermal signatures glow like ghostly blueprints, revealing the outlines of buried houses, forgotten temples, and even entire cities that have been swallowed by the shifting dunes. We have discovered that the Egypt we see on the surface is only a fraction of the Egypt that remains hidden. This perspective from the heavens allows us to map the urban planning of the ancient world without moving a single grain of sand, preserving the integrity of the sites while expanding the horizons of our knowledge. Back on the ground, the science of light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, is performing similar miracles. By firing millions of laser pulses at the Earth and measuring the time it takes for them to bounce back, researchers can create incredibly detailed three-dimensional maps of the terrain. This technology can strip away modern vegetation and debris to show the subtle undulations of the ground that mark ancient irrigation canals or the foundations of lost fortifications. In the Valley of the Kings, ground-penetrating radar is being used to peer into the limestone cliffs, searching for the hollow echoes of undiscovered chambers and the hidden corridors of the soul. These digital eyes allow us to explore the mysteries of the past with the precision of a surgeon, ensuring that when we do decide to excavate, we do so with a map already in our hands. Inside the laboratory, the resurrection becomes even more intimate through the science of paleogenetics. For decades, mummies were seen as fragile artifacts to be unwrapped and studied only for their physical appearance. Today, we treat them as biological archives. By extracting minute fragments of ancient DNA from bone or teeth, scientists can reconstruct the genetic history of an entire nation. We can now trace the lineage of the royal families, identifying the relationships between pharaohs and their queens with absolute certainty. More importantly, this data tells us about the health and migration patterns of the common people. We can see the evolution of diseases, the impact of historical famines on the human genome, and the diverse origins of the populations that gathered along the Nile. The silent residents of the tombs are no longer anonymous figures, they are individuals with stories written in their very cells. The digital reconstruction of architecture is another profound leap in our ability to experience the past. Through the process of photogrammetry, thousands of individual photographs of a ruined temple are stitched together by powerful software to create a perfect digital twin. This allows scholars and the public alike to walk through a reconstructed Great Hall of Karnak or sit within the inner sanctum of Abu Simbel as it appeared 3,000 years ago. We can restore the vibrant colors we explored in earlier chapters, applying the exact chemical hues of Egyptian blue and ochre to the digital stone. This is not just a visual trick, it is a tool for conservation. If a monument is damaged by time or climate change, we now have a permanent, sub-millimeter accurate record of its existence, ensuring that its form and beauty can be preserved for eternity in the digital cloud. The power of the computer also allows us to simulate the ancient environment with startling accuracy. By combining archaeological data with astronomical software, we can recreate the night sky as it appeared to the priest astronomers of Memphis. We can see how the stars aligned with the temple gates on a specific solstice in the year 1000 BCE. We can model the flow of the Nile before the construction of modern dams, understanding exactly how the floodwaters moved through the delta and nourished the fields. These simulations provide a dynamic context for the artifacts we find, turning static objects into functional parts of a living, breathing system. We are no longer looking at the past through a keyhole, we are stepping through the door. Even the sounds of the past are being resurrected. By analyzing the dimensions and materials of ancient musical instruments found in tombs, the harps, the lutes, and the sistrums, acoustic engineers can recreate the tones and resonances of Egyptian music. They can model the reverberations of a chant within the granite walls of a burial chamber, allowing us to hear the auditory landscape of a sacred ritual. This multisensory approach to history creates a deeper emotional connection, reminding us that the people of the Nile lived in a world of vibrant noise, smell, and color, not just the monochromatic silence of the museum shelf. The digital age also brings a new level of democratization to the study of Egypt. Through open-access databases and virtual museums, the treasures of the Nile are being shared with the entire world. A student in a remote village or a researcher in a distant city can examine a high-resolution scan of a papyrus or explore a three-dimensional model of a Sphinx. This global collaboration is accelerating the pace of discovery, as thousands of minds work together to solve the puzzles of the past. The knowledge that was once guarded by a small elite of scribes and priests is now becoming a part of the collective heritage of humanity. However, as we embrace these powerful tools, we must also remain grounded in the physical reality of the land. The digital resurrection is a bridge, not a replacement. The goal of all this technology is to help us listen more closely to what the stones have to tell us. It is a way to refine our questions and sharpen our focus. As we use supercomputers to process the vast amounts of data, we must never lose sight of the human intent behind the artifacts. Behind every genetic sequence is a person who lived and loved. Behind every digital model is an architect who dreamed of the eternal. The transition from the ancient alphabet to the modern algorithm is a journey of continuity. It shows that the human desire to understand our origins is a flame that never goes out. We are still the same curious species that sat around the prehistoric fires, looking at the stars and wondering about our place in the universe. Only now, we have the tools to begin answering some of those ancient questions. The digital resurrection is a testament to our resilience and our commitment to memory. We refuse to let the past fade into the darkness. We use the light of our own age to illuminate the shadows of the ages that came before. The cool blue glow of the computer monitors fades as we step back into the warm, natural light of the evening. The transition from the data to the dream is complete. Having explored how we are bringing the past back to life through science, we are now ready to reflect on the legacy of the Nile and the enduring stillness that remains at the heart of the Egyptian soul. The journey moves from the laboratory back to the riverbank, where the water flows in its eternal cycle and the whispers of the ancestors still linger in the air. The sun is setting, casting a golden light over the digital and the physical worlds alike. The story of Egypt is a living thing, constantly being rewritten and rediscovered. The final chapters of our journey await, where knowledge meets stillness and the history of a civilization becomes a meditation on the nature of time itself. The world is quiet, the data is stored, and the river continues its silent journey toward the sea, carrying the memories of the past into the promise of the future. The cool blue glow of the digital monitors has faded, and as we step back into the golden light of the Nile Valley, we find that the past is not merely a collection of data points or reconstructed pixels. It is a living, breathing influence that continues to shape the foundations of our modern world. To study ancient Egypt is to realize that we are standing on the shoulders of giants who mastered the arts of living and the sciences of the soul thousands of years before the first modern cities were ever dreamed of. The wisdom of the Nile did not die with the last pharaoh, it flowed outward like the annual flood, nourishing the philosophies of Greece, the laws of Rome, and the scientific curiosity of the Renaissance. Today, we carry the echoes of this ancient wisdom in our pockets, in our calendars, and in the very way we organize our thoughts about the universe and our place within it. The most visible legacy of this wisdom is found in the mathematics of the physical world. The architects of the pyramids were not just builders, they were master mathematicians who understood the sacred geometry of the earth. They developed a system of measurement based on the human body, the cubit, and used it to create structures with a precision that still challenges our modern understanding. They understood the properties of the right triangle and the relationship between the diameter and the circumference of a circle long before these concepts were formalized by the mathematicians of the Mediterranean. This mathematical clarity was not an abstract pursuit, it was a tool for creating harmony and mod on Earth. Every time we look at a modern skyscraper or a perfectly aligned bridge, we are seeing the distant descendants of the geometric principles first mastered in the shadow of the Sphinx. Our experience of time is also a direct gift from the Nile. The ancient Egyptians were the first to divide the year into 365 days, based on their meticulous observations of the star Sirius and the cycles of the sun. They divided the day and the night into 12 hours each, creating the 24-hour cycle that dictates the rhythm of our modern lives. When you look at your watch or check the date on your calendar, you are participating in a system of temporal organization that was perfected by priest astronomers 3 millennia ago. They understood that time was a sacred resource, a river that must be measured and respected so that human activity could be aligned with the celestial order. This sense of cosmic punctuality is the very heartbeat of our global civilization. In the realm of ethics and social order, the concept of Mot remains one of the most profound contributions to human thought. Mot was the personification of truth, balance, and justice. It was the belief that the universe functions best when every individual acts with integrity and kindness. To live according to Mot was to ensure that your heart was as light as a feather when it was weighed in the halls of judgment. This ancient ethical framework finds its echoes in the modern concepts of human rights, social justice, and environmental stewardship. The Egyptians understood that we are not separate from nature, but a vital part of its balance. They taught that the king was responsible for the welfare of the poorest citizen and that the land must be protected for the generations to come. This wisdom reminds us that a successful society is measured not just by its monuments, but by its commitment to the common good. The literary and philosophical heritage of Egypt is equally enduring. The instruction of Ptahhotep, written nearly 4,000 years ago, offers advice on humility, leadership, and the art of listening that is as relevant today as it was in the royal courts of Memphis. The Egyptians were among the first to explore the complexities of the human psyche, writing epic poems about the struggle between the heart and the mind, and the search for meaning in a world of constant change. Their stories of magic, adventure, and divine intervention provided the templates for the myths and legends that would later emerge in the Mediterranean and the Near East. The very act of writing, which we take for granted, was elevated by the Egyptians to a sacred art form, a way to anchor the fleeting thoughts of the present in the permanence of the eternal. We also see the wisdom of the Nile in the roots of our medical and chemical knowledge. The herbal remedies and surgical techniques we explored in earlier chapters were the precursors to the scientific medicine of today. The word chemistry itself finds its origins in the word chem, the ancient name for the black land of Egypt. The early alchemists who sought to transform base metals into gold were following in the footsteps of the Egyptian goldsmiths and pigment makers who had mastered the transformative power of fire and minerals. This tradition of experimental inquiry, the desire to understand the hidden properties of matter, is the engine of our modern technological progress. Every time a scientist looks through a microscope or a chemist combines elements in a laboratory, they are continuing a journey that began in the House of Life along the riverbank. The aesthetic of Egypt, the clean lines, the bold colors, and the monumental scale, continues to inspire the artists and architects of the 21st century. We see the influence of the obelisk in the great monuments of our capital cities. We see the patterns of Egyptian jewelry in modern fashion and the motifs of their wall paintings in our contemporary design. This is not just a style, it is a recognition of a universal beauty that transcends time and culture. The Egyptians captured a sense of poise and dignity that still resonates with the human soul. They showed us that art can be a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, a way to make the invisible visible. Perhaps the most important echo of ancient wisdom is the belief in the continuity of life. The Egyptians did not see death as an end, but as a transition to a different state of being. This perspective allowed them to build a civilization that was remarkably stable and optimistic. They faced the challenges of their environment with a sense of calm and purpose, knowing that their actions had consequences that extended far beyond their own lifespans. In a modern world that often feels fragmented and hurried, this ancient focus on the long view, on the building of things that last, is a powerful and necessary medicine. It invites us to slow down, to breathe, and to consider what legacy we are leaving for those who will follow us. As we walk among the ruins of a temple at sunset, we can feel the vibrations of this wisdom in the air. The massive columns are not just dead stone, they are the physical manifestations of a philosophy that sought to harmonize the human and the divine. The whispers of the past are not distant echoes, but clear instructions on how to live with grace and intention. We realize that we are part of a grand, unfolding story, a tapestry of human achievement that stretches back to the very beginning of time and forward into the unknown future. The transition from the specific achievements of the past to the universal truths of the soul is the final movement of our journey. Having explored the science, the history, and the wisdom of the Nile, we are now ready to enter the deepest part of the meditation. The journey moves from the mind to the spirit, from the external world of monuments and dates to the internal world of silence and stillness. The echoes of the past find their ultimate resonance in the quiet of the present moment. The light of the day is fading into a soft, purple twilight, and the stars are beginning to reclaim their positions in the sky. The wisdom of Egypt is all around us, etched in the stones, flowing in the water, and living in our own hearts. We prepare for the final chapters, where the journey ends where it began, in the deep silence of the eternal Nile, where knowledge meets stillness and the soul finds its rest. The world is peaceful, the air is still, and the story of Egypt moves toward its conclusion, carrying the light of ancient wisdom into the quiet sanctuary of the night. The echoes of ancient wisdom and the bustling corridors of history have led us to this moment of profound transition. As we move beyond the dates, the names, and the technical achievements of the Nile Valley, we enter a realm that is not defined by what was built, but by the space that exists within and around those structures. This is the architecture of stillness, a spiritual geography where the physical world dissolves into the metaphysical. To the ancient Egyptians, a temple or a tomb was not merely a house for a god or a resting place for a king, it was a machine for generating silence. They understood that in the absolute quiet of the inner sanctum or the deep darkness of the burial chamber, the human soul could finally hear the heartbeat of the universe. This stillness was not a void or a lack of sound, it was a dense, living presence, a sacred medium through which the eternal could communicate with the temporal. When you stand between the massive columns of the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, you are experiencing the deliberate manipulation of space and light to create a specific psychological state. The columns rise like a stone forest, their papyrus capitals reaching toward a ceiling that was once painted with the stars of the night sky. In the shadows between these giants, the noise of the external world begins to fade. The heat of the Egyptian sun is replaced by a cool, damp air that carries the scent of ancient stone and incense. The scale of the architecture humbles the ego, making the individual feel small yet deeply connected to a much larger design. This is the beginning of the journey into stillness. The architects used the heaviness of the granite and the sandstone to anchor the wandering mind, drawing the focus inward toward the central axis of the temple, where the silence becomes deeper and more absolute with every step. As you move through the successive courtyards, the light diminishes. You pass through massive gateways, pylons, that act as filters, stripping away the distractions of daily life. By the time you reach the sanctuary, the world of the living is a distant memory. In this small, dark room, at the very heart of the temple, the god was said to dwell in a state of perpetual repose. This was the point of ultimate stillness, the primordial mound from which all life emerged at the beginning of time. To be in this space is to be at the center of the world, where time stands still and the boundaries between the self and the divine are blurred. The Egyptians believed that by maintaining this stillness through daily ritual, they were ensuring the continued stability of the entire universe. If the silence was broken, the forces of chaos would return. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings offer a different but equally profound architecture of stillness. Here, the journey is a descent into the earth, a movement away from the light and into the embrace of the ancestors. The long, sloping corridors are decorated with the texts of the underworld, guides for the soul as it navigates the dark hours of the night. But beyond the vibrant colors and the complex symbolism, there is the silence of the rock itself. The thousands of tons of limestone pressing in from all sides create an acoustic environment that is unlike any other. Every breath is amplified, every heartbeat becomes a drum. In this deep, subterranean quiet, the concept of death loses its sting. It is seen not as an end, but as a return to the womb of the earth, a place of perfect peace and regeneration. This stillness was also reflected in the natural landscape. The Nile at night, when the wind has died down and the surface of the water is as smooth as a black mirror, is a temple in its own right. The reflections of the stars dance on the ripples, and the silhouettes of the palm trees stand like silent sentinels along the bank. The Egyptians looked at this landscape and saw a reflection of the celestial Nile in the sky. They understood that the outward stillness of nature was a mirror for the inward stillness of the mind. To sit by the river in the quiet hours before dawn is to participate in a meditation that has been practiced for thousands of years. It is a moment of alignment, where the rhythm of the breath matches the rhythm of the water. The architecture of stillness is also found in the art of the Egyptian scribe and the sculptor. Look at the face of a statue from the Old Kingdom, a seated scribe or a royal couple. There is a quality of monumental calm in their features. They are not caught in a moment of action, they are captured in a state of eternal being. Their eyes look through the viewer and into the infinite. This artistic style was a deliberate choice to represent the soul in its most balanced and peaceful state. By surrounding themselves with these images, the Egyptians were creating a visual environment that promoted tranquility and reflection. They were building a world that encouraged the mind to settle and the heart to open. In our modern lives, we are often overwhelmed by the noise of technology, the demands of work, and the constant flow of information. We have forgotten the importance of the pause, the value of the empty space. The ancient Egyptians remind us that stillness is a prerequisite for wisdom. They taught that Ma'at, the cosmic balance, cannot be heard in the middle of a storm, but only in the quiet of the morning air. By studying their architecture and their philosophy, we can learn how to build our own internal temples of silence. We can learn to create boundaries that protect our inner peace and spaces where our souls can rest and recharge. The transition from the architecture of stone to the architecture of the spirit is the final stage of our journey. We realize that the Great Pyramid and the Temple of Luxor are not just physical monuments, they are symbols of a state of mind. The real architecture of stillness is built within the human heart. It is the ability to remain calm in the center of the storm, to find the quiet point in a world that is always in motion. This is the ultimate gift of the Nile. The realization that the peace we seek is already within us, waiting to be discovered in the silence between our thoughts. The air in the temple is still and cool, and the shadows are growing long. The journey through the history and the science of Egypt is coming to its conclusion. Having explored the outer world of monuments and the inner world of silence, we are now ready for the final chapter. The transition from the architecture of stillness to the ultimate rest is a natural progression. We move from the stone halls to the star-filled sky, where the soul finds its final home among the eternal lights of the north. The sun has set, and the first stars are appearing over the desert horizon. The river flows on, carrying the silence of the ages in its current. The story of Egypt is a song of peace, a meditation on the beauty of the enduring and the sacred. We prepare for the final section, where the journey ends in the deep, healing sleep of the ancient night, and the soul finds its place among the stars. The world is perfectly still, the silence is complete, and the journey moves toward its final rest, where knowledge meets stillness and the eternal night begins. The architecture of stillness has prepared the way, and the heavy stone walls of the temple and the tomb now begin to dissolve into the infinite expanse of the night sky. We have traveled through the deep time of the delta, the brilliant chemistry of color, and the healing gardens of the riverbank, but every journey along the earthly Nile was always intended to lead to this moment. To the ancient Egyptians, the horizon was not a boundary, but a gateway. Death was not a destination, but the beginning of the final and most magnificent voyage, a transition from the physical constraints of the Black Land to the eternal freedom of the celestial river. As we stand on the edge of the western desert, where the sun makes its daily descent into the underworld, we prepare to cast off the moorings of the material world and follow the path of the ancestors toward the imperishable stars. The Egyptian concept of the afterlife was a masterpiece of spiritual geography. They believed that the sky was a vast body of water, a heavenly Nile that mirrored the one on earth. At night, the sun god Ra would travel through the 12 hours of the Duat, facing the forces of chaos and emerging victorious at dawn. Every human soul was invited to join this cosmic cycle. The process began in the Hall of Two Truths, where the heart was weighed against the feather of Mot. This was the ultimate scientific and spiritual audit. If a person had lived in harmony with the natural order, if they had practiced kindness and maintained the balance, their heart would be as light as a feather. This was the moment of total integration, where the individual ego was shed and the essence of the person became one with the universal truth. The journey continued through the fields of reeds, a landscape of perfect abundance where the grain grew taller than a man and the water was always cool and clear. But even this paradise was only a stage on the way to a higher state of being. The ultimate goal was to become an Ak, a transfigured spirit that could shine as a star in the northern sky. The Egyptians called these the Akimu-Sek, the ones that know no destruction, because they never set below the horizon. To become a star was to achieve the ultimate stability, to be a permanent part of the celestial architecture that governed the world. This was the final resurrection, a return to the source of all light and life. As we visualize this ascent, the earth below begins to shrink and fade. The pyramids, the temples, and the bustling cities of the Nile become tiny points of light, eventually vanishing into the darkness. The soul moves upward, guided by the constellations that the priest astronomers had mapped with such devotion. You pass the belt of Orion, the heavenly form of Osiris, and the star Sirius, the herald of the flood. The air becomes thin and pure, vibrating with a frequency that is beyond human hearing. There is no more fear, no more pain, and no more time. There is only the vast, velvety silence of the cosmos, a healing darkness that cradles the spirit in an eternal embrace. The science of the stars was the highest form of knowledge in the ancient world. It was the study of the divine plan, the realization that the same laws that govern the movement of the planets also govern the beating of the human heart. By aligning their monuments with the stars, the Egyptians were anchoring their civilization in the eternal. They understood that we are made of the same substance as the heavens, a truth that modern science has rediscovered in the study of stellar evolution. We are, quite literally, stardust, returning to the furnaces that created us. The final voyage is a homecoming, a return to the primordial state of unity that existed before the beginning of time. In this celestial realm, the boundaries between the past, the present, and the future dissolve. You are at one with the ancestors who walked the riverbank 6,000 years ago, and you are at one with the generations yet to be born. The story of Egypt, with all its grandeur and its mysteries, is revealed as a single note in a much larger symphony. The struggles for power, the building of monuments, and the search for healing were all parts of a collective dream, a way for humanity to experience the beauty of the divine within the limitations of the physical world. Now, the dream is over, and the soul is awake in the brilliant clarity of the eternal day. The silence of the stars is the deepest peace imaginable. It is a stillness that is active and vibrant, filled with the potential for new beginnings. In this state of being, knowledge is no longer something to be sought or learned, it is something that you are. You understand the movement of the tides, the growth of the grain, and the cycles of the sun without needing words or equations. You are the observer and the observed, the creator and the creation. This is the ultimate mot, the perfect balance where all contradictions are resolved and all questions are answered in the simple act of existing. As we drift further into the stellar deep, the memories of the journey through the sections of this project remain like soft echoes. We remember the whisper of the papyrus, the heat of the desert sun, and the cool touch of the temple stone. These experiences were the stepping stones that allowed us to reach this height. They were the lessons that taught us how to listen, how to breathe, and how to find the stillness within ourselves. The science of the Nile was a preparation for the science of the soul, a way to train the mind to perceive the infinite in the finite. The journey is now reaching its absolute conclusion. The vessel of the soul has reached the center of the celestial Nile, and the stars are shining with a brilliance that is both blinding and comforting. The weight of the world has been lifted, and the spirit is as light as the air. There is a sense of profound gratitude for the beauty of the world we have left behind and a sense of infinite wonder for the world we have found. The story of the sleepy science channel is a bridge, and we have now crossed to the other side. The light of the cosmic dawn is beginning to break, not over the desert of Egypt, but over the entire universe. It is a soft, golden glow that signifies the end of the night and the beginning of a new cycle of existence. The voyage is complete, the balance is restored, and the soul is at rest. The silence is now total, a perfect and sacred void that is full of the peace that passes all understanding. The river flows on, both on earth and in the heavens, a silver thread of continuity in a world of change. The wisdom of the ancestors remains with us, a guiding light in the darkness. We close our eyes and let the last of the earthly thoughts fade away, surrendering to the deep, healing sleep of the eternal night. Sleep well.